Hello everyone, welcome back to our history class. We will start a new chapter today, that is chapter 11, that is representation of 1857, or popularly known as the Revolt of 1857. So this chapter, the representation of 1857, or popularly known as the Revolt of 1857, it will not be a new topic for you. I am very much sure that you have already studied this chapter in your high school days. So I will not go into every minute detail of this chapter, yet I will try to focus on the important points of this chapter, that is a representation of 1857. And as your class goes higher, we have to study our concept of learning in a much deeper and a much broader sense. And this representation of 1857 is a continuation of the things that you have already studied, yet it is much deeper and much wider in perspective and in term. So we will see the background of the revolt of 1857. So when we say about the background, it means we are going to flip 2 pages before the coming of the British and how the coming of the British it affected the Indian society. We are going to flip both the pages. So if we see the background of, if we see the background of the revolt of 1857, you will find that India, with the coming of colonialism or with the coming of British rule in India, it brought about social, culture, economic, political, and even to the extent of religious changes that the British brought along with them. So India was socially exploited, even to the extent of their culture. They changed from their old traditional habit to a new system. From the economic point of view, we have already discussed in the previous theater that Indian peasants, Indian farmers, even to the extent of traditional Indian industries were being exploited economically. And from the political point of view, many Indian rulers or many Indian kingdoms, they lost their dominance over their own territory or their own kingdom. So you will find that with the coming of the British rule, the British, they exploited all sections of the Indian society, no doubt. And all this exploitation, it led to the revolt of 1857. That is what we are going to discuss today. And when we say about the revolt of 1857, why the revolt of 1857 is so huge, so significant, and why it is so big, that is the question we need to ask. And another question comes here again is, was there no revolution or no uprising, or was there no rebellion against the British before? If that is the question, it is no. If we look at the history of India, you will find the Gold Uprising of 1831, which was against the British rule for the exploitation of the tenants or the farmers of the Chota Nagpur region in the south. You will also find the Santhal uprisings of 1855 to 56, which we have already discussed in the previous class. All those are an uprising or a revolution or a revolt against the British rule. But yet, it was just local in nature. And when I say local, it means it was confined only to a particular region of India. It do not spread to the entire parts of India. Just in case if a revolution, it starts from Kohima here itself, and it do not spread to Dimapur, Mokokchung, Zenabodo, Wokha, Muntunsang, or any other district, it is just local. But if it spread to the entire districts of Nagaland, it means a revolution or a rebellion of Nagaland. That is the difference here. So also here, for that matter, the Gold Uprising, the Santhal Uprising, all those were against the British, yet it was just local or it was just confined to a small area. Yet the representation or the revolt of 1857 or the uprising of 1857, it was considered as the first war of Indian national independence by some scholars. Why? Because it spreads to many parts of India and it has a huge significance or weightage. And that's why it is known as the first war of Indian independence. So where do we get the sources of the revolt of 1857? When we say sources, for a history student, it is very important to know the sources from where we are getting. These days, we have so many news in social medias, we have so many events in social medias, and many a times are fake news. So in order to keep ourselves updated, we have to see whether those sources are from authentic, from the concerned department or not. It is our duty to check those sources. And as a history student, it is important for us to check the sources from where we get the happenings or the history of the revolt of 1857. And we will find those sources in the writings of those contemporary writers, that is the recent writers, military officers who themselves involved in the revolt of 1857. We get information from scholars, historians, etc. And all these works were compiled and kept in different areas which we will be discussing. And the first we will be discussing is on the official document. In the official document, in the textbooks, you will find many sources from where we get the revolt of 1857. I'm going to mention some few, the rest just go through it. So the first sources I will be mentioning is the National Archives of India. When we say archives, it means a report or a record of some individual or an incident. So we will find the sources for the revolt of 1857 in the National Archives of India. You will also find the sources in the Commonwealth Relation Office, that is in London. When you visit London and when you visit Commonwealth Relation Office, you will find the sources of the revolt of 1857. You will also find in the Home Department proceedings of 1857 to 59. You will also find the sources from Military Department proceedings in the year 1857 to 59. If you go through all these, you will find the sources of the revolt of 1857. And as I've said, the revolt of 1857, it spread to different parts of India. You will also find the sources in West Bengal government official records, in UP government official records, Madhya Pradesh government official records, and even in Bihar. So all these possess papers and records of the revolt of 1857. Next is British newspapers and magazines. We will also find the sources for the revolt of 1857 from British newspapers and magazines. Since British were ruling over India at that time and the revolution or the uprising was against the British, back there in England, in their newspapers and in their magazines, the day-to-day happenings in India were updated in their newspapers. And if you go through their newspapers, their magazines and all, you will find the sources of the revolt of 1857. And apart from that, there is another area where you can find, there are another areas where you can find the sources for the study of the revolt of 1857. That is the Tale of Great Mutiny. It's a name of the textbook written by Fitchett. You will also find the sources from the textbook Indian War of Independence by V.D. Savarkar, and Defense of Lucknow written by Wilson, and The Story of Indian Mutiny by T.R. Holmes. All these are the names of the textbook where you'll find the sources for the revolt of 1857. And apart from these sources, finally we have bendings. So when we say bendings, if you look at a bending, it is very obvious and it is very common for us that we draw some information from bendings. Like if you bended a picture of your village and take it somewhere and hung up there in your room, and if a stranger visited your house and see the bendings, the visitor will obviously have some ideas of your village, the topography, the development, the road condition of your village, etc. So that's how bending, it depicts a history. And bending here, one of the famous bender, Joseph Noel Baton, he bended a picture named In Memoriam. In Memoriam. This was the name of the picture that he bended, And in this picture, he depicted how English women and children, they circled around, they huddled around, and they were just waiting for a dishonor, death, or violence from the hands of the Indians. And this shows a different picture where even the Indians that attacked the Europeans, especially the Britishers. And this painting in memoriam, it gives us a picture of how the English men and women that suffered. So all these are the sources from where we get the events of the revolt of 1857. So if I'm asked, or if you may ask, when did the revolt of 1857 started? It started on 10th May 1857. Please keep in mind all these dates are very important. It started on 10 May 1857 and ended on 1st of November 1858, 1 year and 6 months. So if we are looking in terms of an uprising or a revolt, 1.5 years is a very long year where the Indians revolted against the British authority. And who was the leader of India in the revolt of 1857? We have Bahadur Shah. He was the leader of India. Bahadur Shah Zafar, or popularly known as Bahadur Shah, he was the leader from the Indian side. On the British side, the leader of the revolt was Lord Canning. So with this, we will go into what led to the revolt of 1857, or what are the causes that led to the revolt of 1857. And when we say about the causes or the events that led to the revolt of 1857, it's a very long history. Right from the coming of the British till 1857, we have to assess it, and we have to study the impact of the British rule in India, which led to the uprising of 1857. The first is economic cause or economic causes. When we say economic causes, we have so many histories behind which we have discussed in the last tutor also, that with the coming of British rule or with the coming of colonialism, it destroyed the traditional economic fabric of India, traditional economic structure of India. Indians, they pay heavy taxes. There was a destruction of village industries as well as handicrafts. The Indian peasants felt at the mercy of those zamindars, those Britishers. And then Indian trade was crippled with the coming of the British. Why? Because they always imposed a high tariff policy where Indian goods going out of India to England, they need to pay a very heavy taxes, where the finished products coming from England to India, they were exempted from taxes. That is a policy of one-sided free trade, where the British were free to enter India, where Indians were needed to pay a heavy taxes to the British. So with the coming of the British rule, the traditional handicraft industries declined. And when traditional handicraft industries, it declined, the Indian who were in those industries, those small-scale industries, they go back to the old system, that is cultivation or agriculture. It led to increased pressure on land. Just a small example here, if 20% entered this room, it might be okay. But if 20, 30, 40, 100 people enter this room, we will get suffocated. So also, like in India, there was less cultivators or less farmers. But since traditional handicraft industries declined, more and more people coming into agriculture, which led to increased pressure on land and fragmentation of land holding. People started possessing very less areas for cultivation, and that led to less productivity, which affected their economy. So that was the reason, that was the economic cause why the Indians, they wanted to revolt against the British. The second is political cause. Under political causes, there are many factors, but here I'm going to discuss two very important political factors that led to the revolt of 1857. The first is subsidiary alliance. Under this subsidiary alliance, the British, by the term subsidy means assistance, alliance means friendship. So under this subsidiary alliance, the British, they offered their army to the Indian rulers, to the Indian Rajas, to guard over their territory. But in return, the Indian rulers, they have to pay wages or salary to those British armies. In a sense that it's an economic exploitation. Why? Because the British no longer need to pay their own army, but they are paying from the treasury of India. So under this subsidiary alliance, when the Indian Rajas could not able to pay wages or salaries to those British soldiers or the British East India Company soldiers, their territory or their kingdom were confiscated or were taken over. For that instance, Lucknow, the kingdom of Awadh, Mysore were taken over by the British. The second point is the doctrine of lapse. This was introduced by Lord Dalhousie, and by this doctrine of lapse, any Indian ruler who do not have a legal heir or succession of their own, or who do not have a legal son of their own, their territory or their kingdom or their state were annexed or were taken over by the British. And using this doctrine of lapse policy introduced by Lord Dalhousie, many kingdoms of India like Jhansi, Nagpur, Punjab, Sadra, Jodhpur, all these kingdoms were annexed using this doctrine of lapse, and the right of the succession was denied to the Hindu princes. So with this, many territories of India were being annexed, and those rulers were waiting for an opportunity to revolt against the British, and the rulers, they were trying to take revenge of their lost territory, which also in fact provided one of the causes that led to the revolt of 1857. The next point is socio-religious cause. Under the socio-religious cause, there was a racial superiority or a superiority complex and discriminatory character followed by the British towards the fellow Indians. And the attempt of the British to interfere in the socio-religious lives of the Indians were disliked by the Indians. Why? Because the British coming into India, making many new changes, social changes, like sati, widow remarriage, women education, abolition of child marriage, etc. All these are positive changes, yet for the Indians, it was new to their culture. So it affected the lives of the Indians, and the British, they followed this racial superiority against the Indians, and all this created a suspicious among the Indians against the British. The fourth point is the military causes. Under these military causes, you will find that the Indian soldiers were paid very low wages. Indian soldiers were hardly promoted to a high rank. Indian soldiers were racially insulted, and as I have mentioned, they were not promoted to a high rank. And in 1856, there was a famous law known as General Service Enlistment Act, which was introduced by Lord Canning. And by this General Service Enlistment Act, Indian soldiers, they need to go abroad to do the duty of the British East India Company when need arises. And for the Hindus, especially for the Brahmins, to voyage outside the sea of India and doing duty abroad, it was a taboo to them. And that's why the Indian soldiers, they do not like the idea of this General Service Enlistment Act. So even from the military point of view, they were just waiting for an uprising or a revolt against the British. So with all these points, they were just waiting for an opportunity. So the opportunity was created with the introduction of Enfield rifle. That is the immediate cause. So there was a rumor spreading amongst the Indian sepoys that the new cartridges which the British introduced, it was creased with the fats of cows and swines or pigs. So the bullets, before it loaded, it had to be beaten off by a teeth and have to be loaded. So there was a rumors that these bullets, these cartridges were greased or were smeared with the fats of cows and pigs, and it hurt the religious sentiments of the Indians. Why? Because for the Hindus, beef or cow was revered or was placed at the highest position where they respected. And for the Muslims, pork it was considered as unclean or harmful. So when the new Enfield rifle was introduced, then it affected the religious sentiments of both the Hindus and the Muslims. And finally, with all these factors, combined factors, the immediate cause was created by the introduction of grease cartridges. The fire was triggered, and it led to the revolt of 1857 on 10th May 1857 under the leadership of Bahadur Shah Zafar or Bahadur Shah. So in the next theater, we will go ahead with the nature of the revolt of 1857. So I encourage every one of you to kindly go through your textbooks so that when you come back for the next tutor, you will be well acquainted with the topic, that is the representation of 1857. Thank you.